"You're so sensitive, stop being dramatic." Or, "Wow, how about this one? That never happened." Listen, if you've ever heard these phrases and felt this sudden, super confusing knot in your stomach, you are definitely not alone. So let's dive right into this.
I mean, have you ever gone to someone to share that they upset you? And somehow, almost like magic, by the end of the conversation, you were the one apologizing? It is exhausting, right? It's incredibly disorienting, and it literally makes you doubt your own memory. Well, today, we're going to understand exactly why that happens.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are breaking down the anatomy of manipulation. Look, we hear buzzwords like gaslighting, Darvo, and narcissism thrown around online constantly. But today, we're cutting through all that internet therapy speak to look at the actual clinical realities behind these heavy psychological terms.
Here's our roadmap for The Explainer today. First, the anatomy of emotional manipulation. Second, the Darvo defense tactic. Third, the psychological toll. Fourth, healthy versus unhealthy boundaries. And finally, reclaiming your reality.
All right, Section 1, Anatomy of Emotional Manipulation Beyond the Buzzwords.
Let's start by separating the social media trends from the actual psychological definitions, just so we know exactly what we're dealing with. So gaslighting. It is defined as the persistent manipulation of someone into questioning their own perception of reality. And the absolutely crucial word here is persistent. We're not talking about a simple, everyday disagreement. In a genuine relationship conflict, your partner actually listens and considers your perspective, right? Gaslighting is distinctly different. It's when the manipulator systematically negates your perception, flat out insisting you're wrong or telling you that your emotional reaction is completely irrational.
The evolution of this term is actually fascinating. It comes from a 1938 British play called Gaslight, which was later adapted into a super famous 1944 film starring Ingrid Bergman. In the story, a husband manipulates the gaslights in their home to dim them, and when his wife points it out, he insists she's literally imagining things, and the whole shebang was just to make her think she's losing her mind so he could steal her jewels. It remained an obscure clinical term for decades until it seeped into our lexicon in the 2010s and then totally exploded in pop culture, even being named Merriam-Webster's Word of the Year in 2022. But, with all that popularity comes a lot of misuse.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Darvo defense tactic, or flipping the script.
So moving from the broader concept of gaslighting, we have this highly specific, highly calculated mechanism used by manipulators, Darvo. It's an acronym coined back in the 1990s by psychologist Dr. Jennifer Freyd. It stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. Now, this isn't just someone overreacting in the heat of the moment, okay? It is a calculated narrative shift designed specifically to evade accountability. Darvo is a real game changer because it actively exploits your most basic psychological vulnerabilities, things like confusion, guilt, shame, and that deep-seated fear of just not being believed.
Let's actually watch how this builds in a real-time confrontation. Step 1 is deny. This is refusing to acknowledge the issue or minimizing the harm. Basically, that never happened. Step 2 is attack. Here, they're questioning your character or credibility. You're being dramatic, or your memory is terrible. And then step 3, this is the real twist. Reverse victim and offender. They suddenly claim that they are the real victim. Something like, "I can't believe you'd attack me after all I've sacrificed for you." Boom. Suddenly, you are completely on the defensive, completely sidetracked from your original, totally valid concern.
Let's move on to Section 3, the psychological toll, the damage done.
So what actually happens to a person's mental health when they endure this type of conversational manipulation over a long period of time? Well, often, we see these tactics used by individuals who display narcissistic traits. As outlined by clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula, these traits basically cluster together to create this intense environment of emotional control. We're talking about an overwhelming sense of entitlement, a distinct lack of empathy for your feelings, and a dizzying cycle of idealization followed by rapid devaluation. So they might absolutely shower you with intense affection at first, only to suddenly shift to harsh criticism and a total denial of your worth.
The clinical damage this does to the victim is frankly staggering. People living in this environment experience chronic anxiety and hypervigilance. You're constantly tiptoeing around, right? Just trying to avoid setting the other person off. Research actually shows that Darvo exposure directly increases internalized self-blame, which is tied to deep psychological distress and even PTSD symptoms. Ultimately, it warps your perception of reality, leading to a complete loss of your sense of boundaries. You literally start to believe that you are the perpetrator.
Let's get into Section 4, healthy versus unhealthy boundaries, creating safety.
Okay, so how do we stop this cycle? How do we intervene? It all comes down to your ultimate defense mechanism,
your boundaries. And there is a stark contrast here. Healthy boundaries mean you feel comfortable saying no without carrying around excessive guilt. You can express your needs calmly, and you take responsibility for your own emotions rather than blaming others. Unhealthy boundaries, on the other hand, operate in massive extremes. It's either extreme rigidity, putting up huge walls, struggling to trust, and shutting everyone out to avoid vulnerability, or it's enmeshment. That's where you overshare, feel responsible for someone else's emotions, and say yes when you desperately mean no.
To put this into practice, Harbor Psychiatry offers this incredibly actionable phrase to use when you're confronted with Darvo. I understand you disagree, but this is what happened to me. I love this. It's simple, it's firm, and it completely refuses to debate your reality. Now, when you first set a boundary like this, fully expect it to feel incredibly uncomfortable. But remember, that discomfort doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Actually, it usually means you are finally breaking an old, toxic pattern.
Bringing us to our final part, Section 5, Reclaiming Your Reality, Healing, and Self-Worth.
It is time to shift the focus entirely away from the abuser and put it right back onto your agency and your healing. There is a foundational truth from Dr. Ramani Durvasula's work, and it's this: healing begins with accepting it is not your fault. You absolutely cannot change a manipulator's behavior by just trying harder to appease them. Cultivating a strong sense of self-worth is absolutely imperative here, because when you acknowledge your own value, you stop accepting those internalized negative narratives that suggest you somehow deserve poor treatment.
So, let's look at a practical toolkit for your safety. First, documenting your experience. Write down dates and specific phrases soon after events happen so you have a solid anchor to your reality when the gaslighting starts. Second, set those firm boundaries we just talked about. Third, avoid role reversal by using the broken record technique. Just calmly and consistently restate the facts without getting drawn into their side arguments. And fourth, definitely seek professional support. Therapy offers a safe, validating space to process all that confusion, rebuild your self-trust, and really strengthen your resilience.
Wow, we have covered a lot of crucial ground today, haven't we? We've moved from the clinical anatomy of emotional manipulation all the way to how you can actively protect your own mind. So, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Where do your boundaries currently lie, and are you ready to take back your reality? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Remember to prioritize your emotional safety and never, ever forget that your reality is valid.